Thank you, Samana. There are countries where dictators get 100% of the votes. Well, Egypt is one, Syria used to be one, but people stood up asking for democracy, freedom, and Islam, and they wanted voting rights. That is struggle we have gone through in this country. But instead of people claiming 100% of the vote for themselves, they still want to have election, except some people can vote more freely. Other people will have to sort of stand in line maybe 9, 10 hours and maybe not vote. To discuss what is going on in our country, with me is someone who is fighting for the poor people's movement, which is not only for our rights for the poor people and the homeless, but also liberating our country from the fear, hate, and anger of the people of color. We have Reverend Graylan Hagler, who is a senior minister at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ in Washington, D.C. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, brother. Tell us this. What in the world is happening to our right to vote? Are we going to have some vote?
Well, it's a continual struggle. We're really in a crisis right now. And if you can think about it in terms of historically in the United States, it started out that really originally only property owners could vote. White property owners could vote. Then it was expanded to other people, other whites being able to vote. Women and that was white men. Women and black people and people of color were basically denied the vote. And the whole struggle around voting rights was exactly that, to have influence over the process by being able to vote your representatives. Well, that happened after the Civil War to some extent, where one person, one vote was enforced after the Civil War in the South. And you had over 2,000 black people, black men, elected to offices in southern United States that had basically denied the enfranchisement of blacks previous to that, which only began to show what the power of being able to vote really meant. Well, that did not last too long. Reconstruction was dismantled in the country, and there was a constitutional crisis in 1876 in the Tilden Hayes election that was thrown into Congress. And there was a compromise that was made that Hayes would go to the White House and become president. But as a part of that compromise, Hayes had to agree to withdraw the last remaining Union troops from the South, and did so, with the Supreme Court going hand in hand throughout the years in terms of reversing the things that had happened to readmit states into the Union. And as a casualty of that process was voting rights. And basically people were denied the right to vote. And you had basically white Southern politicians, white Northern politicians that were in office while denying others the right to vote. That's a part of the history of this country.
What stage of history are we in now?
Well, I think that we're in another period of Reconstruction where they're trying to dismantle the vote, trying to limit people in the right to vote, so that basically those despots who are basically selected to safeguard a reprehensible system of white supremacy are basically running for office and trying to deny others the ability to vote. Because one thing that happens that we've seen in this last presidential election, when people vote, there are things that happen that do not allow despots and dictators and demagogues to be happy. And that is when people vote, they turn out of office those people that are damaging to the country. And so what we're dealing with state after state is all of these state houses basically passing restrictive voting laws to make sure that people are not able to go to the polls and exercise a constitutional right.
How hopeful are you about the American democracy? It slowly moves in the right direction, but right now pretty fast moving in the wrong direction.
Well, remember we just celebrated here in the United States the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And the country always likes to resonate with the I have a dream speech. because they can basically manipulate that and twist it into something that it was not. But the I Have a Dream speech was to mobilize forces to get a Voting Rights Act passed. And that happened in 1963. The Voting Rights Act was passed was proposed in 1964, and it was enacted in 1965. And so what I'm getting at, there's always been a struggle at the federal level to get Congress to protect the right to vote. Congress continues to renege on that. What we're dealing with right now is you're hearing people talk about, well, it should be left up to the states. It should be left up to the states. Well, that is the old Jim Crow argument. That is also the slavery argument in this country, that whether a state was a slave state or a free state should be left up to the states. Well, that becomes problematic because you end up having bastions of conservatism and bastions of hatred. And basically you have states that have been nurtured in a kind of backwards kind of politics that needs to be challenged, should be challenged. And the only way you challenge it is that you make sure that people have the right to vote.
Why there are no liberal Republicans when we got a couple of conservative Democrats who don't want to let the voting right bill pass?
Well, one thing that happened under Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. With the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, basically white politics was rooted in the Democratic Party. And it remained rooted in the Democratic Party that we refer to as Dixiecrats, really up until the Civil Rights Act and also the issues around Fannie Lou Hamer and other folks planting themselves in the Democratic Convention, that there was a mass exodus of whites from the Democratic Party into the Republican Party, and that was solidified under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, who went down to Mississippi, to Meridian, Mississippi, to declare his candidacy. And you got to ask, why would you go to Meridian, Mississippi to declare your candidacy? It's not a major media market. Well, it's where the civil rights workers were killed. Squatter, Cheney, and Goodman were killed. He went down there signaling that this was, again, a part of the Southern strategy and basically solidified whites in the Republican Party and the Republican Party becoming more and more pronounced around white supremacy. And therefore, it moves towards its natural conclusion. Now, you have the Republican Party under Reagan that sort of have dressed up its racism in tones that sort of sound a little bit logical, that sounds not so violent. And then you end up having a Tea Party that pushes the Republican Party even further to the right. And then in the aftermath of the Tea Party, it moves towards its natural conclusion with MAGA, Make America Great Again, that pushes it even further to the right and even more loud in terms of white supremacist tenets.
So do you think that trend of the Republican Party just moving towards the white supremacy will continue in the near future?
It'll continue in the near future until there is something that exposes the contradiction and blows it up and make people run in the opposite direction. But right now, a big part of America are afraid of people of color. They're afraid of the change that is taking place in the United States. One thing that helped to spearhead this push to the right was the election of Barack Obama, because for a lot of people, they really felt that the presidency was synonymous with white people. And when Barack Obama got elected, it was for a big part of the country. It felt that the train had gone off the tracks. And therefore, someone like this Trump was able to come along with all of his demagoguery, all of his racism, and basically harness the power and the strength of that conservative aspect of the party and use what dictators use all over the world, which is groups of people to shout groups of people to threaten to take lives, all of those types of things, to shout you down in order to terrorize the people who are not necessarily that far to the right, but now are too intimidated to speak up and act up until it's exposed as being the dictatorship that it is.
Well, that's what said the extremist minority in France brought the revolution. An extremist who didn't have a majority vote was Hitler's party. So the minority solidified with lots of guns as well. Tell me about this. Do you fear civil war?
Well, to a great degree, I feel that we're in the midst of a civil war. And to some degree, it's actually been a shooting civil war already, because we saw the types of things that have happened in terms of like Ahmaud Arbery's killing down in Georgia, those types of things. The young man getting off in Wisconsin, coming across state lines with an assault weapon in the middle of demonstrations that were taking place, and shooting 3 people and doing no time. All those types of things have really pointed to the fact that possibly we're in the midst of a civil war right now. And in fact, a lot of the entities that actually look at countries around the world and look at the markers of what leads to a civil war has basically said the United States, where it is right now, basically fulfills all of those markers that suggest a civil war.
Reverend, we may or may not get anything passed from the Congress. Even the congressional leaders are saying that. So in the absence of a congressional action, in the absence of a fair election, what the poor people's movement is planning to do?
Well, I think that the reality is the movement that has happened in this country historically has always happened in the streets, because basically Congress is a reactive body. It eventually reacts to that which takes place in the streets. Politicians are reactive by nature and basically respond to what takes place in the streets. And I think that what we really got to do is intensify efforts in the streets, demonstrations, the kinds of pickets, the kinds of things that are going on right now, from hunger strikes to pickets to demonstrations. Those types of things have got to be heightened in order for us to be taken seriously, and to folks to understand that we mean business. That one thing that we do know is that unless the country changes, the country will not survive.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Hagler, for your time in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much.